Victory Studios in downtown Little Rock. This is Capitol View with your host, Jesse Tenor.
Good Sunday morning to you and welcome into Capitol View. I'm Jesse Tenor. After 3 months of wrangling and legislating, the 92nd General Assembly is all but over. We saw some controversial bills taken up at the very end, and now lawmakers from both parties get the chance to reflect on the good, bad, and the unknown. We'll hear a reaction from Democrats later in the show, but we want to begin with two men who've been very busy the last several weeks and really the past 3 months. House Speaker Matthew Shepard and Senate President Pro Tem Jim Hendren. Welcome back to the show, guys.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. And so as far as the good goes, I think I know some of what you guys will say. The governor did end up getting his 4 T's to remind people: teacher salaries, tax cuts, transportation, and most recently the transformation of state government. Some of those probably took more wrangling than others behind the scenes from what we were able to see. The last time you were on the show previewing the session right before it started, you were saying that the highway issue, transportation would be the most fluid. Did that live up to your expectations, or did something else kind of take up more time, take more wrangling?
No, I think it did, and it was a good example of collaboration between both ends of the legislature, between the governor's office and the highway, the industry. But at the end, it was really remarkable the way we came up with something that everybody supported and passed overwhelmingly. And again, it's probably the biggest accomplishment of the legislative session, because we've been trying for so long to do something about our decaying infrastructure, to accommodate the growth that's going on in certain areas of the state. So it was good to see that work.
From the House side too, would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that those particular pieces of legislation are what I'm most proud of, because for the better part of the last 8 years since I've been in the legislature, the highway funding issue has been a recurring theme, and all we've generally been able to do in the past are essentially short-term fixes. And we understand that the voters will have an opportunity to let their voice be heard on this issue, but I'm really proud of the fact that we have a plan that, if approved by the voters, will resolve the highway funding issue for the foreseeable future. And it is, as Senator Hendren said, it's a great example of the collaborative process in terms of legislating, and there were a lot of time and effort went into that. You know, sometimes it seemed like there was no way we were going to find common ground, and fortunately, we were able to find that common ground, and I really appreciate the bipartisan support that we received.
What did some of that common ground come down to? I mean, what were some maybe, I don't know, different things that people maybe had to give up or compromise on?
Well, probably I was, I think in retrospect, I was probably one of the I guess one of the issues that I wanted to see was I wanted to see something done with existing revenue. And so when we were able to put a piece of the revenue stream from the casino gambling, from the gaming side of things, I think that was something that was a very positive step. And I think because of the fact that we increased gas and diesel taxes and then we referred out the half-cent sales tax, I felt like it was important for a number of members in the House to be able to show that we were trying to do more with what we have currently, and I think that was part of what allowed us to get the kind of support we needed to be able to pass both bills.
Now, speaking of tax cuts, that obviously took some wrangling too. I know even not just for those top income earners that the governor wanted to focus on this time around, but also homestead property tax and even internet sales tax. What kind of had to go on to get some of those signed?
And really what you saw yesterday was the result of 2 years of work of the Tax Reform and Relief Task Force and others. The governor obviously made increasing that homestead credit a priority of his, and there was a lot of wrangling between both ends, but we came to a compromise. But to do corporate tax reform, to do overall tax reform, to do income tax relief, all in the same session was really remarkable, and it would not have happened had we not worked and came up with a plan. Particularly on the corporate side. Many of the issues that were in the corporate tax reform bill, many of us had never heard of before until we began to study the issue and have folks from industry and experts in tax policy come and tell us, where is Arkansas lagging behind in relation to other states? So that's an example, again, of the legislative process working, doing your due diligence up front, so when the session does come, you're ready to do some big things. So again, overall, the tax reform and relief effort was probably one of the biggest that has happened in the legislature.
And then one of the other T's, the teacher salaries, that's good for the next 4 years, been approved, but kind of the unknown of that is what happens after that. How do we fund it? So is it fair to say that that's already going to start being tackled now that the session's over, start looking at that, or give it a little bit of time to breathe?
No, I think that educational funding is always something that is, I think, on the minds of a lot of legislators, and particularly with the teacher pay, that's going to be part of that discussion, and I anticipate that we will see a lot of talk and effort go into that over the next 2 years and even beyond that.
And then also, for the first time in years when we did the session preview, you guys were saying that you didn't expect this big drama over Medicaid expansion, Arkansas Works, and then even with the pending litigation, and then we know that the federal judge's decision came down right after the Senate had passed the DHS appropriation, leaving a fun bit a couple days for the House. Can you just talk about what happened between the time that it failed and then the several days after when it ended up passing?
I think it was really just a matter of a lot of conversations, and clearly a lot of the discussion with regard to the appropriation ends up being on the Republican side of the aisle, and so the governor talked with a lot of members. I had conversations with a lot of members, and at the end of the day, we got the necessary votes we needed. And I said yesterday, in some ways, I'm glad that the court decision came down before we voted, just because there was a lot about that was up in the air. We couldn't wait on the court decision, so I think that what we did in trying to move it forward, because we were approaching the end of session, and that bill, that appropriation, we had allowed it to sit for a long time and allowed members to take a look at it. There were members, I think, that had holds on that particular piece of legislation. But in some way, now in retrospect, I'm glad that the court decision came down before we voted, because at least we were able to take that up, have the discussion, and allow members to understand what the ramifications were. And in my mind, the court decision, while I mean, it's obviously something that we have to keep in mind, from my perspective, it didn't change the fact that we needed to approve the appropriation.
More with the legislative leaders coming up after a quick break. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
Improve the beauty and safety of your home while increasing the value, too. Bill's Fence Company installs all types of residential fencing, such as iron, wood, chain link, and vinyl. We also install gate operators and access controls. Put your tax refund to work for you. Call Bill's Fence Company for your free estimate.
Hi, I'm Steve Barnhill, inviting you and your family to come try our lunch buffet. Featuring fried catfish, baked chicken, pork barbecue, fresh veggies, salad, dessert, and a long-tenured staff to take care of your every need.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Come and enjoy a new experience in shopping for your home. At Aladdin Rugs and Home Decor, we have over 5,000 rugs in the latest colors and styles. Bring your pillows, your pillow shams, and sizes. We will help you select the perfect rug. We're #1 in customer service with 15,000 square feet of rugs, unique home decor, wallpaper, and flooring. Remember, buy today, take it home today, and save. Why wait?
At Arkansas Spine and Pain, we know that family is everything. It fuels our love, our laughter, and unfortunately, some of our pain. That's why we're here, to help you and your loved ones live pain-free. Get back to doing the things you love, fishing with the grandkids, playing a round of golf, exploring the natural state. So give us a call today and let our family at Arkansas Spine and Pain get you out of the painful cycle you're in. You deserve to get your life back ASAP.
Whatever you want to be, it helps to be well. An active, healthy lifestyle is key. We offer tips and support to quit smoking and address health conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure. It's never too late to make decisions to help you be healthier. Be you. Be well.
Watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to Capitol View. We are back with Senate President Pro Tem Jim Hendren and House Speaker Matthew Shepard. I wanted to talk to you about one of the governor's, not his fortes, but definitely a priority he made clear was some sort of school choice bill, and there ended up being two, the Pulaski County focused one and the statewide one. Statewide one made it further, but even though it passed the Senate, failed in a House committee. What do you think has to be done with that? You're supportive of school choice, correct? And so moving forward, what do you think has to be done?
I'm supportive of some forms of school choice. I think that issue is it's a big issue, and of course it really came to the forefront late in the session, and there were several different alternatives that were placed out there. But as you've seen, it's something that there are a lot of different viewpoints on it. I think that it's something that will continue to be discussed. I think that for any plan to move forward, we had 2 years ago, we had a pilot program that was proposed. I think that in the current makeup of the legislature, for any success on that issue, I think it's going to have to be probably some sort of pilot program. But again, it's one that, you know, the legislators let their voices be heard. The Education Committee took it up. I know that they had a lot of discussion and debate, and so now it's another thing that could be discussed over the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And then the governor this past week told us that he has yet to veto any bills, and he didn't plan to make his first the bill to ban sanctuary cities in Arkansas that ended up passing this past week, one of the last things. And he did announce that he wouldn't veto that bill the same day that he signed 2 other pieces of legislation into law to allow DACA nursing students to get their license here in Arkansas, and then to allow certain immigrants, including DACA recipients, to get in-state tuition. And so what do you think of that dynamic there? I feel like a lot of people around the country that are, you know, looking at Arkansas from the outside in may find that kind of odd, since since Arkansas voted about 75% for Trump, and, you know, immigration is always a very hot topic statewide and nationwide. What did you think of those kind of dynamics?
Well, I was glad to see us do something with regard to the in-state tuition for DACA. I was glad to see us do something for licensing the nursing. It made no sense to educate these kids and then not allow them to practice in Arkansas. So those were 2 steps in the right direction, and I think, again, they received pretty overwhelming support. At least one of them did. The sanctuary city thing, I think, with the commitment that the governor has gotten from Senator Stubblefield to address the one concern that he had, and the fact that there are no cities doing sanctuary policies right now, makes it where there's a degree of comfort that it's not a major thing that cannot be fixed in a couple years. So again, I think it's part of the legislative process, and it does send a message that we want the law to be enforced, and I think that's probably the view of the majority of the legislature.
What was your take on all this?
Well, I think to your question about how do we understand all this, and how can somebody from the outside look and say, well, what's going on in Arkansas? I think it's just really reflective of the fact that in the legislature you have legislators that have very independent-minded on issues, and that just as we've seen, while we've cut taxes, we've been willing to raise taxes to fund highways, and the same on these issues. And that it's just, I think, reflective of the kind of the independent nature of each member of the legislature. And somehow we're able to come together every couple of years and pass pieces of legislation, but I don't think you can necessarily say that the Arkansas House, the Arkansas Senate's going to do this thing on this issue, because I think it's reflective of the fact that we take it up on an issue-by-issue basis.
Okay. Now, before the session was even over, you had lawmakers in the House and Senate already talking about the leadership positions, being House Speaker and Senate President Pro Tem. What are y'all's plans for the leadership, for Arkansas politics in general, and your role in it in the next session? Do you plan to still be at the helm?
Well, let's see, I think I'm 4 months into a 2-year term, so I guess that's a time we normally start talking about what are you going to do next. But
right.
So I haven't started thinking about it yet. I'm going to try to finish out my term as pro tem to make sure that the Senate continues to improve, function efficiently. I know soon, because we will have leadership elections in the fiscal session, so that's still nearly a year away. Soon at some point we'll make some decisions about that. But right now I'm just focused on trying to continue to make the Senate the best it can be.
What about you, still Speaker Shepard?
Well, you know, over the course of the session, I've had a number of members that have encouraged me to seek a second term as Speaker, and I've said that I would consider that I wanted to get through the session, and now that we're through, you know, I'm talking with members and gauging where the level of support is, and so I'm considering that and open to that. But really, for me, you know, I would only be interested in that if the membership as a whole is interested in seeing me come back to that post.
Okay. Well, hey, we appreciate you both coming back to the show. I know that this may be one of the last things you felt like rehashing after, you know, busy 3 months, but we appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Jesse.
And when we come back, we'll get the minority party's perspective. 2 House Democratic freshmen join me to talk about their accomplishments in the first months in office. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
The next level of the competition competition has arrived.
This round is absolutely brutal.
The mentoring begins, and only half of the acts will make the cut. New World of Dance, tonight on NBC.
Prettiest little mommy I've ever seen.
I bring you the pills. All this goes away the second you disrespect me.
What's going on?
I can't find Jane.
They took my kid.
Good Girls, tonight on NBC.
This time of year, your heater is probably working hard, but is it as warm in your house as it should be? Is your bill too high because of it? You should call Herbert Heating and Air. For 25 years, Herbert Heating and Air has provided excellent service at an affordable price. Whether you need a new unit, a repair to your existing system, a routine service, or even a second opinion, call Herbert Heating and Air for a free estimate. 501-888-2773. Let our family help your family. Herbert Heating and Air.
My feet hurt so bad in the morning, I couldn't even put my feet on the floor. So I had to start engineering my own arch support. So I got that, then I put this in there, this one. Finally, before I added another one of these in, I went to Good Feet, and they gave me this. So I built all this together to engineer a solution to my pain. And if I'd have just gone to Good Feet, I'd have been better off in the first place.
Good Feet Arch Supports, engineered for pain relief, personally fitted for you.
Did you know minorities are 1.4 times more likely to be obese? This epidemic of obesity can be slowed with a simple lifestyle change by cooking with love and eating in as a family. Cooking at home is healthier, less expensive, promotes family togetherness, and helps prevent heart disease. So cook with love. Eat in tonight. Go to southern8fried.org for meal plans and healthier alternatives to preparing Southern-style foods and begin your transition to healthier living.
You don't reach a milestone of 50 years in business without having a passion for what you do, taking care of the customer and valuing your product. And at Allen Tillery Chevrolet Buick GMC, that's exactly how we achieve that goal. Hi, I'm Allen Tillery. For over 50 years, the car business has been in my blood, and it runs through the whole family. We want to take care of you, be it service, state-of-the-art body shop, or your next vehicle. So come join the Allen Tillery family. That's Allen Tillery Auto in Hot Springs.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to Capitol View. We've heard the majority party's perspective on the 92nd General Assembly. Joining me now from the Democratic side are freshman representatives Megan Godfrey and Nicole Clowney. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, I mean, even though you were in the minority party, I feel like you still got to check some things off of your to-do list these past 3 months. And so, Representative Godfrey, I wanted to start with you. Definitely what I just talked about with the House and Senate leadership was the DACA nursing bill and then also the in-state tuition bill. I know you had a lot to do with both. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like to get it passed, the work that went behind it?
Sure. It was definitely a great day to celebrate yesterday with the signing of both of those bills. The DACA nursing bill was one that I had really championed from the very beginning and brought into this session as an idea from some members of my campaign team. And so it was really great to see that signed into law yesterday after so much hard work, even before the session went into it. Some of the stories that were told in the committees from nursing students here in Arkansas were really compelling and really made the case for why this is such an important issue and why it was worth championing. And so it's really exciting to see it cross the finish line yesterday.
I want to get to more of that in a sec, but
sure.
Representative Clowney, I wanted to ask you about one of the things you got to check off too, and that was the firefighter bill for those who have gotten cancer in the line of duty. I know that was one of the main things you were working on.
Yeah, I'm so proud we carried that across the finish line. It's just, you know, when we are out on the campaign trail meeting people and seeing all of their life stories and hearing ways that the state could have made their lives a little bit better. You hear those stories and you can't forget them. And so I think carrying that into the session is just something that we really wanted to get done for our state's bravest men and women and their families. Now, if they do contract one of those cancers that they can contract in the line of duty, we'll be able to take care of them a little bit better. And at the end of the day, that's what I think this job is all about.
And then Representative Clowney, you wanted to continue the conversation about different domestic violence measures that weren't ultimately able to pass. I know one that you had argued would put really just the state in line with federal law as far as not allowing someone convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence charge, right, to be able to buy or possess a gun. take us through, catch us up on that debate for people who maybe weren't paying too much attention to it. Why did it not end up being able to pass?
Yeah, so under current federal law, if you have a misdemeanor domestic violence conviction, you are not allowed to purchase or possess a firearm. Having a gun, if you have a misdemeanor domestic violence conviction, is a federal felony. But our state law doesn't give our law enforcement any way to enforce that law. And so we have law enforcement officers who are entering situations where they know that somebody may be in violation of the federal law by having a gun. These situations are the most dangerous for our law enforcement officers, and yet they're sort of kneecapped by our current law. So this was an attempt to fix that. Because it is such a safety issue, such a public safety issue for our law enforcement officers, we were happy to have law enforcement support. It was co-sponsored by Republican member of the House, Dwight Tosh, former Arkansas State Police captain. So we made a lot of progress. I think there are a lot of ways to measure wins. And I think, you know, having a bill signed into law is obviously the ideal win. But we had a very good conversation about an issue that involved domestic violence and guns. And I think anytime you bring guns into the conversation, so often it's just shut down. We didn't see that with this bill. We saw some real productive dialogue, and at the end of the day, if you look at the votes, you'll see it had bipartisan support. So it's the first step in a long chain, and we'll get it done eventually, and this was a great way to start.
Just moving forward too, I know that going kind of like watching from the outside of the session in 2017, you may have come into this one thinking, okay, maybe, you know, abortion will continue to be a big topic, guns will continue to be a big topic. Of course, we did see a lot of abortion legislation pass, but as far as guns go, I mean, the Stand Your Ground law, that was controversial, but it ended up not getting its day to, you know, be signed by the governor, saying that he would push it, you know, 2 more years. What did you think about that, since 2017 was pretty different, just kind of the dynamic as being a freshman lawmaker and watching that go through?
I think one of the great things about this session is to really see firsthand how Arkansas doesn't necessarily, we think for ourselves, and we don't follow the narrative that federal politics lays out for us. And I think that we really saw a lot of independent thinking, particularly with these hot button issues like guns. I think that for a very long time, the narrative has been that the gun lobby, that the NRA is this sort of big, unbeatable force. And what we saw this session was Arkansas lawmakers on both sides of the aisle say, these out-of-state special interest groups won't tell us what to do. We're going to think for ourselves and do what's best for the people of Arkansas. This is what the people of Arkansas wanted to see done. This is what will keep them safe. And we did that this session, and I couldn't be prouder that we were able to be a part of that.
And Hendren and Shepard earlier on the show were saying that, you know, about your bills too. With, you know, they were saying it could be an immigration, you know, topic, but you didn't make it about that. And then people looking from the outside in could be still kind of surprised, though, that we did that in Arkansas.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to celebrate there. And I think that something that I didn't anticipate coming in as a freshman was how important relationship and consensus building is. You hear that and you know that that has to, you know, take place to get the job done, but it really played out in significant ways, both in regards to things that we were able to stop and things that we were able to pursue and champion. And so I've been really grateful for more conservative members in the House who have been willing to engage in that dialogue and say, hey, we may not agree on everything, but let's find the common ground and let's find a way that we can kind of talk about this together and find a way to either stop or push something forward.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming off of all that positivity, the Arkansas Times, though, did come out with an article during this session that it was the worst legislature. What would your response be to that?
I think that's easy to do kind of away from it, especially when there become kind of some villains of the session, you know, some folks who you may not agree with, and therefore it's easy to kind of, you know, villainize some of our colleagues who, when we interact with them day in and day out, it's like, well, actually, you know, that person gave me a really nice pep talk before my bill, or, you know, actually, you know, he sent a nice text to you know, partner with me in this particular, you know, committee situation. And so I think we have been able to, you know, to build those relationships in a way that has been really important and really meaningful, and that will help us to continue the work that we need to do. I think that, you know, Representative McConnell and I have garnered the respect of a lot of our colleagues, even if we may never share votes. I think that that's been a win, and that's been a way that, you know, even as freshman Democrats, we can come and say, you know, we didn't hate it. We didn't, you know, we didn't experience it as the worst ever, because there were so many things that we can look back on and feel really proud about, and a lot of those conversations and those, you know, those relationships with folks who may be on the front page of the paper and look like the bad guy, but who we can work with and who we can find common ground with.
And when you look back on the session, I mean, I think starting out, nobody would have thought that we would have passed a solar leasing bill. Nobody would have thought that we would have been able to fight back these attacks on the minimum wage. I think that there has been so much good work that has been done in so many areas, and we're grateful to the media that bring, you know, as much attention to those things as the negative.
We try, since there was 800 plus bills signed into law.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's been neat about our stories is that we've had a lot of friends and constituents and folks from back home who have engaged in this legislature in a new way and express a lot of gratitude and hope from the stories we've been able to tell that are worth celebrating. And I think sometimes when you just look at the headlines or you hear the negative, it is easy to focus on that, and it is easy to think about, you know, the legislature is not representing us, but we've just been encouraged by the stories from home of folks saying, I'm so excited about the small wins, and thank you for telling those stories and for bringing those ideas back home, and we do feel represented, and so I think we can be proud about that.
Representative Clowney, Representative Godfrey, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And stay with us. We'll be back to wrap it all up after this. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
The delicious fish sandwich from Sonic. It's 100% Alaska pollock smothered with tartar sauce and pickles on a brioche bun. Have we reeled you in yet? Did you catch that? The fish sandwich only at Sonic. Are you hooked?
Hi, I'm Missy Gibson. At John Gibson Auto Sales, we offer our customers the opportunity to buy almost any vehicle. We have over 900 cars, trucks, SUVs, motorcycles, ATVs, campers, performance trailers, and boats. We will finance your purchase in-house regardless of your credit history. You can actually make your purchase from home or on the go. Simply go online to johngibsonautosales.com and take a virtual tour of our inventory. We call it shopping made easy. See you soon at John Gibson Auto Sales, in person or online.
I love an ice cream sandwich on a Sonic night.
The official beginning of cargo short season.
Guess how many ice cream sandwiches I can fit in my cards?
3?
7?
No way.
You say 3? Don't insult my cards, bro.
Hurry in for Sonic Nights. New $1.49 ice cream cookie sandwiches and half-price shakes after 8.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And that does it for today's show. Don't forget, you can now take Capitol View on the go. Download the Capitol View podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And we're back with an all-new Capitol View next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.